Welcome to the cutting edge of the global awakening.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex.
Well, it looks like the North Tower of the World Trade Center has just completely collapsed.
The U.S. dollar's status as the preeminent reserve currency is under attack.
This is a mathematical fact. Tens of trillions of dollars are being extracted from the United States of America.
You really want the truth? Then just follow the money.
Welcome to Follow the Money Radio, a broadcast dedicated to your personal, spiritual, and financial liberty. And now, here's your voice of reason in the midst of global chaos, economist and best-selling author, Jerry Robinson.
Greetings, friends. Welcome to the broadcast. We have a lot to cover this week, including the latest events unfolding in the volatile region of the Middle East, an update on the newly revived peace talks between Israel and Palestine. Tom Cloud will be here with an update on gold and silver, and we'll conclude with a major update on America's crumbling petrodollar system. But before we begin, before we get started, let's think for a moment about what the United States is attempting to do in the nation of Syria. As Americans, I believe that we need to step back for a moment and realize that Iraq, Iran, Syria, Saudi Arabia, all of these countries of the Middle East, spread out all across the Near East, have been slow to adapt to our new world of nation states. Now, what do I mean by that? These countries, Syria, Iran, Iraq, have long been at the heart of major world empires that knew nothing of the concept of a sovereign nation state. These are brand new inventions made by the West. Sovereign states, nation states, the idea of sovereign borders and a rule of law existing only for that particular state. In the Middle East, these nations understood and understand the concept of empire much better than they do the more novel Western form of nation states. The people of the Middle East have a glorious history of empire, including the Roman Empire, which they were a part of, and more recently the Ottoman Empire, which was born in 1299 and really disintegrated around the time of World War I. But it's not just the nations of the Middle East that are accustomed to this idea of empire. It's also Europe. Think of the Austrian Empire or the Russian Empire. Or what about the British Empire? History is filled with the stories of empire, not nation states. The nation state, while admittedly brilliant in its success, is much more advanced in Western nations and in Western ideals and in Western textbooks. It's more commonly understood in the West than it is in the Near East or even the Far East. After all, the nation-state concept was birthed in the West. It's a Western ideal. Now, the remnants of the ancient Roman Empire, which span across modern Europe today, much of the Near East also, were broken up and divided in recent centuries in order to manage them better. No matter where you look in the Middle East, South America, or much of Asia, what you find are former colonies of Western empires. They once belonged to the various empires of Europe, these countries did. And now, they are attempting to make their way in a brand new world composed not of empires in the most restrictive definition, but instead in this new world of nation states. Can you imagine what would happen if the Middle East were actually left to its own devices? It would form an empire similar to the one created by the Ottoman Turks. Do you think that they would actually create nation states? That's a Western ideal that has been imposed upon them by the West. They would form an empire if they were left to their own devices, similar to the one created by the Ottomans. And this empire would control immense amounts of oil wealth. All of these countries, all of these nation states that currently have so much oil beneath their sand, all of that would exist within the confines of a Middle East empire. The Middle East and its resources would be much more difficult to manage if it were unified. So, since the Turkish Empire virtually dissolved in the wake of World War I, the West has held a divide-and-conquer policy towards these newly formed nation-states of the Middle East. The United States, the United Kingdom, and France literally remapped the Middle East in the wake of World War I. The Ottoman Turkish Empire imploded. It turned on itself and was destroyed as a result. Now, the West, U.S., U.K., France, in the wake of World War I, they drew brand new borders and they created brand new names for these new nation states. Nation states called Iraq, which formerly was the glory of Babylon, or new nation states like Iran, which was the former empire of the Persians, or Syria, as they called it early on, Transjordan. Now, these nation states, Iraq, Iran, Syria, we can go around all over the Middle East and just talk about them, but I'm wanting to focus on the ones that are in the news right now to give you some perspective. These nation states did not desire or understand the concept of the rule of law as it pertains to nation states. They did not draw their own borders. They did not name their countries. All of these things, including the borders and the names of everything in the Middle East, has been superimposed upon it to a people who are accustomed to empire. The Ottoman Empire was fairly spread out. There was no concept of nation states within the empire, the same way with Roman Empire. If you're in the Roman Empire, you're in the Roman Empire, right? I mean, there may be different governors over different areas, but overall, you're within the overreaching realm of the Roman Empire if you're in it, and there is no concept of sovereignty within that empire. So the United States, Britain, and France carve up the Middle East in the wake of World War I. This is so important. It's not talked about in the news. They don't talk about it even in history very much, because remember, the victors always write the history. But something really major happened after the United States, France, and Britain carved up the Middle East in the wake of World War I. And what was that? Massive oil deposits were discovered in many of these nations. Now, why is oil so important? Well, virtually the entire global infrastructure is currently based on oil. It fuels global commerce. It enables militaries to engage in global wars. The West, which was very afraid of so much wealth existing in some of these countries, because remember, when they designed these countries and they put borders upon these countries, some of them were very large, relatively large anyway, like Iraq and Iran. These countries are sitting on massive amounts of oil. And so a plan was devised to go in and break these nations up into even smaller states and carve them up even more. Why? To prevent them from ever being able to collude and form an empire again. The West is deathly afraid of the wealth that exists in the Middle East, and they realize that the borders of these nations needed to be redrawn yet again to prevent these nations from becoming too strong or too dominant within the region. So in the early 1950s, Iran, for example, decided that it did not want its vast natural resources, namely oil, to be plundered by Western oil companies. The British treated Iran like a vassal state. It was a former colony, taking its oil for pennies and selling it for huge profits on the international market. Now, Iran, who has a glorious past and is a very proud nation of their past, under the direction of President Mohammad Mossadegh, decided to nationalize the oil fields and to kick out the Western oil companies that were treating the nation like their prey. So around 1953, Britain gained support from President Eisenhower, who labeled Mossadegh as a communist. Now, back in the 1950s, communists were viewed much like terrorists are today. It's how you get everybody riled up. Oh, he's a terrorist. Oh, well, we need to put him in jail. Put him down in Gitmo and force feed him. Put him in solitary confinement. But don't charge him with anything. Just indefinitely detain him. Well, that's how communists were viewed back in the 1950s. In the post-World War II era, very suspicious of communists here in the United States and much of Europe. So together, the British intelligence service, the MI6, and the CIA staged a coup in 1953 to overthrow the democratically elected Mohammad Mossadegh. And in his place, they installed the Shah, who was a brutal dictator who did much to destroy the national identity of the Iranian people. I mean, this guy was brutal. And in the minds of the average Iranian, the Shah was a U.S.-installed puppet. So in 1979, the Iranian people, mostly led by college students who were actually reading history books and saying, what in the world has happened to our nation? What's happened to our country? Why are we being pillaged? Why are we being plundered? Why did the U.S. overthrow a democratically elected leader in our country? And they staged a massive kidnapping at the U.S. Embassy. Big problem that Carter had to deal with, 444 days. Big deal. They released him whenever Reagan got in office. They released all of the hostages. But once the Iranian people overthrew the U.S.-imposed Shah in 1979, it gave rise to the modern governments that are led by these ayatollahs, which are the supreme leaders of Iran. And that's just one example of some of the crazy things that have gone on in the Middle East. If you're looking at this Middle East situation and you're scratching your head or you're perturbed or disturbed like I am, then let's just take a step back for a minute and realize what this whole thing is about. Back in 2011, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton. Now I'm going to play you a clip from his interview on Fox News Channel back in 2011 regarding the building tensions between the U.S. and Iran. Listen as he boldly explains the U.S. position towards the Middle East. Roll the tape.
Well, Iran has made little secret of its desire to gain hegemony in the region of the Persian Gulf, the critical oil and natural gas producing region that we fought so many wars to try and protect our economy and from the adverse impact of losing that supply or having it available only at very high prices.
Okay. If you can believe your ears, I'm going to play that for you again. John Bolton, 2011, Fox News, saying that the reason why we've been engaged in the Middle East for so long is not to bring peace to these people. It's not to bring lasting peace to this region. Instead, quite to the contrary, our involvement in the Middle East has been purely economic and geopolitical in many ways to maintain our hegemony in the area. Because if we don't hold it, then China will hold it. Or Russia will hold it, or Europe will hold it. Or even worse, in the U.S. mind, the Middle East themselves will control their own destiny. Let's roll this tape again, and I want you to hear the absolute wickedness that emits out of this guy's mouth, publicly telling you exactly why they are spilling your son and my son and our daughter's blood on the fields of the Middle East. Because of money.
The critical oil and natural gas producing region that we fought so many wars to try and protect our economy and from the adverse impact of losing that supply or having it available only at very high prices. Iran continues to support terrorists in and around the region. They continue to pursue nuclear weapons. And if they gain the upper hand in Iraq, as they have the upper hand now in Syria and Lebanon, our friends, Israel, and our Arab friends in the region are going to be sorely pressed.
So is it possible that 8 years of American efforts, almost $1 trillion in money, but most importantly, the cost of precious American lives, could all be for naught?
I think it's a very real risk, and I think the president just failed to understand the significance of what he's done, both in terms of the cost we've already borne and the risks and cost we may bear in the future.
There you go. This is what's important to these psychopathic leaders in Washington who are hell-bent on going to war and staying at war with the Middle East. That is how these psychopaths think. They run the military-industrial complex. They run the central banks around the world with very few exceptions, and Iran is one of those exceptions. Why they want to get in there is anybody's guess. Well, we'll talk about that toward the end of the show because we have now more hard data from the Jerusalem Post as to what's going on in Iran, really. And what these global elites do is they want to send the poor in this country off to fight the poor of those countries over natural resources, and they spill the blood of our sons and daughters for the economy. And they just admitted it right there in the mainstream press, and they're bold about it. They do it over and over and over again. I could play you multiple clips. How before the Iraq war, it was not about oil. We're not going in to get Saddam because of oil. But they didn't tell you that they were actually buddies with Saddam back in the 80s while they were providing him with chemical weapons and biological weapons. That's how they knew that Iraq had some weapons in the first place over whenever they were building the drumbeats to war in 2002, because they had sold Iraq millions of dollars worth of weapons to fight against Iran back in the 80s. Now, a quick quiz. How many nations or countries has the nation-state of Iran invaded over the last 60 years? How many? It's a goose egg. It's a big fat zero. On the contrary, how many countries has the United States invaded and or sabotaged over the last 60 years? You don't hear that kind of reporting on the mainstream press, do you? Because the victors get to write history. And they don't want you to think about the fact that they had done this back in 1953 with Iran. They don't want you to know the real reasons as to why Iran revolted in 1979. In 1979, when these Iranian students kidnapped these and took many hostages for over a year in the U.S. Embassy, it was an absolute travesty, terrible. You know what they wanted? You know what their demands were? United States, would you apologize for coming into our country in 1953 and authorizing the overthrow of our democratically elected government? Would you apologize publicly for overthrowing our government and ousting our democratically elected leader out of power through a coup through the CIA covertly and with your buddies in the MI6 in Britain? Will you apologize publicly for destroying our nation and implementing a Shah over us who is a brutal dictator and has killed so many people in our country and has destroyed our national identity? They wanted an apology. And of course, the United States is not going to apologize to Iran. They deserved to have their democratically elected government overthrown, according to the CIA and the MI6. Friends, you got to wake up. This is all about controlling the access to oil. It's a currency war, and oil is priced in dollars. We all know that by now, right? Well, I don't think so. Unfortunately, many in America seem intent on waging perpetual war in the Middle East, in that region. And I tell you, I really believe that war will never permanently cease until Christ returns. It just simply won't happen. Think about Saudi Arabia, for example. Don't the Washington elites know that we, the people, are aware that Saudi Arabia poses the greatest threat within the Middle East? All of this attention to Iran. And is Iran crazy? Do they want a nuclear weapon? Do they want to wipe Israel off the map? Sure. They're crazy. They're mad. They're angry. And they feel like a trapped dog. You ever corner a dog before? You know what he does to you? He's very dangerous. Don't corner a dog. But what they don't talk about, what the media doesn't tell you about, is the fact that Saudi Arabia produced 15 of the 19 hijackers from 9/11. But no questions. No questions about why 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi Arabians. No talk about the fact of the secret cable from WikiLeaks that came out in 2011 that showed that the Saudis provide the world's largest source of funds for Islamic militant groups. No worried about that. Not going to talk about that in the mainstream press. The Saudis have some of the worst religious freedom violations. Christian persecution, Ministry Open Doors, has rated Saudi Arabia as one of the most repressive regimes in the world against Christians, along with North Korea. The Saudis are vehemently anti-Christian. They're vehemently anti-Semitic. They restrict all other religions outside of Islam in their country. Not even a Bible or a crucifix is allowed inside the country. Christians are publicly flogged, beheaded, and executed for their faith. And despite all of these facts, the United States, which loves to bill itself as a Christian nation, considers Saudi Arabia as one of their closest allies in the region. However, if the Saudis ever decide to move away from the petrodollar system, which means pricing their oil in dollars, you better believe, you better expect that the warmongering neocons that run our country will demonize the Saudis and talk about how they are trying to create terrorism. They will beat their war drums, and they'll go in and they'll turn that country right back around to serve our interests. Now, what about Syria? The United States has authorized, through the Congress and the White House, to begin flowing weapons into Syria openly. Britain is financing Syrian rebels. Saudi Arabia, Jordan, financing Syrian rebels. And these Syrian rebels are the worst kind of people on the planet. Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra Front, which are part of the Al-Qaeda movement. We've also got some sketchy reports out of the British press that the Taliban is in the region. In fact, the Israeli Defense Forces have called Syria the global bastion of Islamic radicalism, thanks in large part to the Western efforts to finance and prop up these rebels in Syria. 5,000 people are dying every single month in Syria. 5,000 people every single month. That's 1.5 9/11s every single month in Syria. And if you're living in some sort of fantasy world where these 93,000 people are not women and not children and not innocent people and not elderly people, but instead are all Syrian army folks, you're dead wrong. The civilian casualties in Syria are absolutely staggering. The United States is financing and propping up Al-Qaeda, possibly the Taliban, Al-Nusra Front in Syria. We're financing them. We're providing them with weapons. It's almost as if we never learned from our mistakes. We did this in the 80s with Iraq, and then Saddam turned around and started invading Kuwait, and then we had to go in and stop him. We did this in the 80s again in Afghanistan when we started arming the Mujahideen, which happened to have a guy named Laden with them, and he happily took the U.S. weapons and turned it against us. Why are we pumping so many weapons into Syria? I'll tell you why. It's because the military-industrial complex, which runs this country from the top down, and if you want proof of that, take a look at what happened on Thursday when Justin Amash, representative from Michigan, attempted to bring some sunshine to the NSA because they're snooping on your phone calls. Every time you pick up your phone, they're getting tapes of it. They're being able to record it and store it forever. And he said, let's defund that program unless they actually have just cause. And the NSA leader, the head, the chief, General Keith Alexander, called a top-secret meeting where the press was not invited, the public's not invited, only invitation only. Senators and congressmen were allowed in so that they could get talking points on why they should vote against this amendment to defund their absolute tyrannical overreach. And despite a very close vote, the amendment was shot down on Thursday. Your Congress voted to say that this NSA, which they have no accountability over apparently, no oversight that's meaningful in any way, they said, yes, we'll sick you on the American public. It's okay for you to tap their phones illegally. It's okay for you to request anything that you want. We don't want to stop you from doing anything. You just do all you want. Basically, military-industrial complex, have your way. with the American people. Why did the congressmen do that? Because they are bought by the military-industrial complex. These guys got cash. Now think about it. If you're part of the military-industrial complex and you're making chemicals for war and you're making bombs, how long of a shelf life do those things have? You've got to drop those things on somebody, don't you? Because these companies are just like a hot dog stand. They have to make fresh hot dogs. They got to make fresh bombs, right? They have to. It's a business model. People are investing in their stock. There's a publicly traded stock. They've got to create more bombs. They've got to have a demand for war. And so if the U.S. will not drop these bombs on somebody in some sort of war, we'll go out and stage a drill and drop them into the middle of the sea. But do whatever you got to do. Drop these bombs. You got to order more from us. And the U.S. says, okay. And how do we pay for it? Through the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve loves war. Central banks throughout history have financed war. Do you know how many wars have occurred since 1800? I mean, we're talking, there's too many to count. Al-Qaeda is growing in dominance in Syria. For goodness sake, Syria was a French colony. It was owned by the French until 1946. This nation state called Syria is totally backwards. They have these new borders that are put around them. They're given this name Syria. This is who you're called. This is where your borders are. Don't leave this area. And of course you have people there going, well, how did I end up here? And why is this my country? And who named this country Syria? And who made these borders? And when they find out that it's the West who made the borders, they go, hey, you guys talk about self-determination and all of this, but you impose these things on us and you determine our leaders. We don't like this. Al-Qaeda and other types of terrorist groups like the Al-Nusra Front, and if you haven't seen the Al-Nusra Front, if you haven't seen how sick these guys are, go to YouTube and type in Al-Nusra and just type in beheading. I'm telling you, if you got a weak stomach, don't do it. You want to see how these guys are. These are the guys that we're financing. They're over there killing innocent Christians. They're over there killing innocent Jews. They're over there killing other innocent Muslims who they just don't happen to like. And we're financing this. Imagine, I want you to think about this for a minute, because the U.S. has financed and provided weapons to Al-Qaeda in Syria. Do you understand what this means? I want you to imagine for a moment that Canada decided that we were getting out of line, okay? And so what they do is they bring over Al-Qaeda and they just drop them off in the middle of Chicago and say, we want you to clean this city up. The city's it's too backwards. Just clean it up. Crazy, right? The mayor's crazy. The governor of Illinois is crazy. Let's just teach them a lesson. And they let Al-Qaeda loose on the streets of Chicago with weapons from the military-industrial complex in the United States. I know it's far-fetched. The United States would never do that to its own people, right? Let's say they did that. You think Al-Qaeda is walking through those streets and just carefully aiming their gun at only the bad people? Or do you think they're ripping through those streets and killing kids and killing women and killing innocent people and blowing up everything in sight? We have stuck Al-Qaeda on Syria. It's an absolute tragedy. And every single one of these warmongering neocons in Washington ought to be down on their knees, begging for forgiveness for what they're doing to the Syrian people. 100,000 people dead? That blood is on our hands. You think Al-Qaeda, once we send them in, and there, by the way, there was a big prison break in Iraq. Looks like the West decided, hey, let's send some more of these goons up there. Yeah, you remember Abu Ghraib. Remember that prison in Iraq where we got all those pictures of the prisoners being tortured and all of this that came out? Big disgrace for the United States. Well, apparently there was a prison break, and a bunch of these Al-Qaeda members got out of the Iraqi prison, and guess where they're heading? Up to Syria. Sounds awful convenient. It sounds like we're getting more rebels. We're going around the Middle East and shaking things up and getting more people to go up to Syria to help our efforts. This is absolutely perverse. And you think Al-Qaeda is going to go quietly once Assad is finally ousted from power? Do you think the Al-Qaeda are going to say, okay, U.S., you can have Syria now. We'll leave. We can't afford this. The United States is bankrupt. We can't afford to be going over to Syria, trying to fix their problems. We're not going to fix Syria by sending the military over. You think that the United States military going to Syria is going to fix this? Back to Chicago for a minute. Imagine Al-Qaeda running through your streets, funded by the United States government and the British government, given weapons, according to the British press, chemical weapons. The United States holds the most chemical weapons on the planet, and they tell everybody else not to have them. Can you imagine Al-Qaeda, U.S.-funded Al-Qaeda running through your streets, picking off people as they saw fit, terrorizing your city, and you say, what are you doing to our country? And they say, well, if you don't straighten up, we're going to send our military over. Absolutely appalling. I want to play you an audio clip. It's going to ask you to pretend something that may or may not be realistic in the future. It all depends who you ask. And that is that Chinese troops have invaded Texas. Imagine for a moment that the Chinese made a backdoor deal with our neighbor to the south, Mexico, and it permitted them easy entry into America through our porous border with Mexico. They have come to teach us a lesson. The Chinese have come to invade Texas. I'll play this audio clip for you. It has some music behind it, so it might get a little loud. But I want you to listen to the content and think about what's being said.
Imagine for a moment that somewhere in the middle of Texas there was a large foreign military base. Say Chinese or Russian. Imagine that thousands of armed foreign troops were constantly patrolling American streets in military vehicles. Imagine they were here under the auspices of keeping us safe, or promoting democracy, or protecting their strategic interests. Imagine that they operated outside of U.S. law and that the Constitution did not apply to them. Imagine that every now and then they made mistakes or acted on bad information and accidentally killed or terrorized innocent Americans, including women and children, most of the time with little or no repercussions or consequences. Imagine that they set up checkpoints on our soil and routinely searched and ransacked entire neighborhoods of homes. Imagine if Americans were fearful of these foreign troops and overwhelmingly thought America would be better off without their presence. Imagine if some Americans were so angry about them being in Texas that they actually joined together to fight them off in defense of our soil and sovereignty because leadership and government refused or were unable to do so. Imagine that those Americans were labeled terrorists or insurgents for their defensive actions and routinely killed or captured or tortured by the foreign troops on our land. Imagine that the occupiers' attitude was that if they just killed enough Americans, the resistance would stop. But instead, for every American killed, 10 more would take up arms against them, resulting in perpetual bloodshed. Imagine if most of the citizens of the foreign land also wanted these troops to return home. Imagine if they elected a leader who promised to bring them home and put an end to this horror. Imagine if that leader changed his mind once he took office. The reality is that our military presence on foreign soil is as offensive to the people that live there as armed Chinese troops would be if they were stationed in Texas. Shutting down military bases and ceasing to deal with other nations with threats and violence is not isolationism. It is the opposite. Opening ourselves up to friendship, honest trade, and diplomacy is the foreign policy of peace and prosperity. It is the only foreign policy that will not bankrupt us in the short order, as our current actions most definitely will. I share the disappointment of the American people in the foreign policy rhetoric coming from the administration. The sad thing is, our foreign policy will change eventually, as Rome's did, when all budgetary and monetary tricks to fund it are exhausted.
Just like ancient Rome, we have overextended ourselves. It's not to say that Syria is right. It's not to say that Iran is right. It's to say that the United States is making the same mistakes over and over and over again. Those who do not know history are doomed to repeat it.
Follow the Money Weekly presents your precious metals market update. Here's Tom Cloud.
Jerry, it's been quite an interesting week, starting with the bankruptcy of Detroit, as I watched national TV channels and YouTube things to see the lady policeman standing there giving 38 years service to Detroit and doesn't know if she'll ever see a penny of her retirement account, and we're now seeing 28 cities on the troubled list, and the triple downgrade of the debt in Chicago was mind-boggling. We basically see Chicago, one of the 5 largest cities in the country, going bankrupt, and people are going to be lined up trying to get pension and health benefits that just aren't there. And we really think that we've talked about this fall, going all the way back to spring on this show many times, that it was going to be something to remember. I think we're even clearer now with all the buy signals clearing, and we see people like Richard Russell and some of the top newsletters that are giving buy signals on gold in particular right this minute. You just can't go wrong, getting in there. The bank bail-in situation is still very much in play. We're hearing unconfirmed rumors the FDIC is getting ready to cut back their insurance limit from $250 to $100. They're going to be telling you that things are better, so they're cutting it back, when in reality it's just the opposite. So it really is, we're coming to that time, starting in just probably next week in August, that we're going to start seeing things really move. We still believe that gold will be up for the 13th straight year, even though it's currently 20% down. So what I'm saying is we expect gold to go up over 20% the remainder of the year. And this debt problem is going to really start spreading, and it's something that we just really have to watch out for, because it's going to turn on a dime, these downgrades. And when it does, central banks are going to just go crazy buying gold. There's a strong rumor out of Europe that after the 580-ton purchase on June the 28th, there's a 500-ton purchase being priced at different places in London, and this could come down at any time. So right now, all I can tell you is we're very bullish on gold and platinum and palladium. I'll deal with silver last, but platinum and palladium continue to go up. The strike is part of the effect on it, but some people are just starting to see the inflation numbers creep in, and may have talked about last week when you see the article that gasoline's gone up 17% a year under Obama, and they're telling you there's no inflation. Americans just got to stand up and quit thinking positive that things are going to get worked out by the government. With $221 trillion of derivatives that we know we have an obligation for, not the $1 quadrillion worldwide, but this Detroit situation just shows us the tip of the iceberg. You see poor people who work their whole careers and have no retirement. Palladium and platinum will flourish if inflation comes and we don't go into a recession. Both these metals are going to continue up, and both of them are up for 2013. Lastly, silver remains the only question we're not sure about. I have a confirmation on the buy signal. We did get above 2050 for 2 days, and then yesterday it wouldn't hold for the third day, and we've seen it weaken and drop 35 cents below the 2050 that we were likely seeing confirmed for 3 days in a row. So we actually didn't get any buy signals from the timing services that we use on silver, even though we literally could have had one yesterday. It could have happened on Wednesday or Thursday if it hadn't been for the drop in the price. So we may have to wait another 2 or 3 weeks to get a confirmation, and we may see silver fall back below $20 and even down to the $19 level. But certainly when I'm sourcing it, that's not the case, and the prices and the delays in it are back to 2 to 4 weeks again after they improve for a while. So demand is still very strong for physical silver, and certainly it cannot hold on. The last thing to say is you want to keep accumulating silver, and we do have a silver round Buffalo special that runs through July 31st that one of our wholesalers has given an allocation of at $1.50 over spot instead of the normal $1.75 or $1.80 over spot. And certainly everyone that can afford to buy 20 coins should at least add that as a no-brainer. So I think we just continue to get ready, because it's going to be a fall, and I'm looking for supplies to get very thin, both in gold and silver, and delays to increase as we head into the fall, and certainly when we get into September. August And then another strong rumor we're hearing is that India, as their crop season starts, they've always bought gold, but with the new add-on tax they put on gold, that they're not allowed to put on silver, because silver is an industrial metal. We're hearing that a lot of people in India are going to start buying silver that really have always been gold purchasers, and this also will have an effect on silver going into late August into September. So there are a lot of things we're watching for out there, not to take too lightly potential war and what's going on in Israel and Syria and Iran, still very much in the possibility realm of something breaking loose there before the year's out. And certainly the banking situation could break loose at any minute anywhere in Europe that could get here very quickly. So we just got to keep our eye on, but we're getting now to where we have to look a lot closer. If you need to talk to me, you can reach me at 800-247-2812. That's 800-247-2812. If you're not receiving our email blast, you can sign up for those, and we do keep them completely confidential at ftmdaily.com. Just go to the Precious Metals button and put in your email, and we'll get you on the list, and once again, it'll never be used in any other way or shown to anybody. So with this week's Precious Metals Market Update, this is Tom Cloud signing out.
Gold, silver, palladium. If you have questions about or are looking to purchase precious metals, there is one name to know and one name to call. Tom Cloud at 1-800-247-2812. You hear Tom every week on Follow the Money Weekly, and gold and silver are an excellent hedge against inflation. Tom Cloud has over 30 years' experience as a precious metals advisor. Don't buy your precious metals through a call center and pay inflated prices. Call Tom Cloud, 1-800-247-2812. And for a limited time, tell Tom you heard it from Jerry Robinson on Follow the Money Weekly and receive free shipping and insurance on your order. That's right. Mention Follow the Money Weekly and your shipping and insurance charges are waived on your precious metals purchase. If you have a question about something you heard on the show, call Tom. And to secure your precious metals investment, call Tom. Your gold guy, Tom Cloud. 1-800-247-2812. That's 1-800-247-2812. You heard it on Follow the Money Weekly.
Jay Peroni, Certified Financial Planner, here with the idea of the week. This week we'll take a look at a company that's been innovating what we wear for over 100 years. A recent survey found this company's products in 8 out of 10 American households. They're sold in hundreds of stores, plus the web and catalog. This highly innovative clothing company is worth a closer look. Our Contrarian Strategies portfolio turns up the best mid-cap stocks that are innovative companies for the long haul. It does this by discovering companies with robust earnings momentum that leads to a string of quarterly earnings surprises and thriving share prices. It looks for turnaround stocks and companies people are heavily betting against. We find companies poised to explode once they surpass investors' expectations. The portfolio consists of 20 companies focused on innovation and growth. It focuses on mid-cap stocks between $2.5 and $10 billion in market cap, and it focuses on companies and sectors that have catalysts ahead and could take off quickly. When we look for innovative companies, we look for companies that have made it past the startup stage and are well on their way to changing the world around us. Take, for example, this Winston-Salem, North Carolina-based company that's a global consumer goods company with more than a century of history and a portfolio of leading apparel essentials including T-shirts, bras, panties, men's underwear, kids' underwear, socks, casual wear, and activewear. You'll instantly recognize some of its globe-leading brands, which include Hanes, Champion, Playtex, Bally, Legs, Just My Size, Barely There, and Wonderbra. I'm referring to Hanes Brands Incorporated, ticker symbol HBI. Its brands are strong and some of the largest in consumer goods. Hanes Brands does over $4.5 billion in annual retail dollar sales and is number 1 or number 2 player in almost every product category in which it competes in the United States. Here are just a few of its many innovations. Hanes EcoSmart products include fabric fibers made from recycled plastic bottles, recycled fabric waste, or flax. Champion Eco products use future-friendly recycled polyester fibers. Together, the brands keep approximately 70 million plastic bottles out of landfills each year. Then there's Hanes Head-to-Toe Comfort. It's a pioneer in comfort. Hanes perfected the tagless tee, the lay-flat collar, and the no-ride-up panty, and is introducing its new super soft Comfort Blend t-shirts and briefs. The cotton poly fabric is soft, fast-drying, and shrinks less. There's no tags, no seams, no runs. Its innovations deliver comfort, fit, and value. Then there's the Comfort Toe Seam Socks. All Hanes socks utilize a patent-pending sewing technology that produces a smoother, flatter seam, so those are just a few of its many innovations. Bottom line, Hanes Incorporated ticker symbol HBI is a good buy up to $60 a share. This should be a good double-digit growth stock as it continues innovating what we wear. It also pays an 80-cent per share dividend, giving it a projected dividend yield of 1.5%. So if you're looking for a combination of growth and income, Hanes brand ticker symbol HBI is worth a closer look. This is Jay Perrone, Certified Financial Planner, signing off for the Idea of the Week. We'll see you again next week.
All right. Well, Jay Perrone is a CFP, Certified Financial Planner, a member of our Christian Financial Advisor Network, and he also manages our very own PACE investment portfolio. If you would like to have a free 30-minute review of your investments with Jay, you can call him at 888-664-6963. That's 888-664-6963. And when you do, be sure to tell him you heard about him on Follow the Money Weekly Radio.
The representatives of two proud people today have decided that the difficult road ahead is worth traveling. So they have courageously recognized that in order for Israelis and Palestinians to live together side by side in peace and security, they must begin by sitting at the table together in direct talks.
When they say peace and security, then sudden destruction comes upon them. News breaking that there are fresh talks of peace in the Middle East. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has been to the Middle East region 6 times since March. Israeli-Palestinian talks broke down last September of 2010 over disagreements between the two parties, mainly over Israel's construction of settlements in areas of the West Bank where the Palestinians want to establish an independent state. But according to Kerry, the new peace deal, which is based upon the 2002 Arab League Peace Initiative, which will provide Israel with a very broad peace with its Muslim and Arab neighbors.
Israel needs to look hard at this initiative, which promises Israel peace with 22 Arab nations and 35 Muslim nations, a total of 57 nations that are standing and waiting for the possibility of making peace with Israel. When this process started several months ago, there were very wide gaps, very significant gaps between the two sides. And I think Nasser would agree with me that through hard and deliberate, patient work, and most importantly, through quiet work, we have been able to narrow those gaps very significantly. And so we continue to get closer, and I continue to remain hopeful that the sides will soon be able to come to sit at the same table. If everything goes as expected, Sai Barakat and Tzipi Livni, Minister Livni, and Itzhak Molho will be joining me in Washington to begin initial talks within the next week or so. And a further announcement will be made by all of us at that time. I'm hopeful because of the courageous leadership shown by President Abbas and Prime Minister Netanyahu. Both of them have chosen to make difficult choices here, and both of them were instrumental in pushing in this direction. We wouldn't be standing here tonight if they hadn't made the choices.
All right, so some pretty big news this week that John Kerry was able to get both sides to commit to talks about talks. In essence, we're basically going to be having talks about having talks, and that's going to begin possibly in about a week's time. Now, according to Kerry, this new peace deal, which is based on the 2002 Arab League Peace Initiative, would provide Israel with peace, as he mentioned, with 22 Arab nations, 35 Muslim nations, a total of 57 nations altogether. Now, the Arab League currently supports Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. Their support of Abbas is instrumental and very important and provides stability to peace talks between both parties. Now, under the terms of this new peace agreement, these 57 nations will agree for the first time to recognize Israel as a legitimate nation if, and it's a very big if Israel is willing to give up the land that it won in the Six-Day War of 1967. And, of course, we're talking about the very heart of Israel, that is the city of Jerusalem. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said on record that 2013, and I quote, is a decisive year for the economy, security, and promoting peace. Israel has already made some impressive concessions to show their commitment to the new round of peace talks. They've agreed to release 80 Palestinian prisoners, many of whom have been in prison for decades. But at this point, I personally believe that chances for a peace agreement are small because there are just so many potential sticking points that could trip up the negotiations, including the pre-1967 borders, potential new attacks by Hamas in the region, trying to stir up more trouble, arguments over Israeli settlements, which are highly contentious, and perhaps most importantly, the status of Jerusalem, as well as access to the Jewish holy site known as the Temple Mount. And while the chances for peace are very slim, I have to admit that this really is an interesting year for Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu, for example, is presiding over Israel's 33rd government, which was formed last March. In fact, it was the Ides of March. Beware the Ides of March. But as I watched this Israeli government form, I realized that it was the first government in a decade in Israel that had no ultra-Orthodox parties. The ultra-Orthodox parties, who lead with a strong sense of nationalism, they're experiencing an ebb in popularity. Israel is tired and wants peace. It's been decades of war, terrorism, nonstop violence, and Israel's economy is growing. And the Palestinian people also are becoming, they have cell phones now, they have smartphones. They're not interested in as much in, especially the young people, are not as interested in blowing themselves up. And the Israelis are not, especially the young people, are not as focused on the whole nationalistic fervor that gave birth to the modern state of Israel with Theodore Herzl and the Zionist movement. You just don't see that kind of attitude within the younger populations of these areas. They want peace. They want to have a good economy. They want to have decent relations. I don't think that many of them have false impressions that they're going to be best buddies by any stretch of the imagination, but they also don't want to have their economy just constantly being assaulted through terrorist acts. And so both of them are reaching a place where they just want to stop. However, I will tell you that I believe this is a trap for Israel, but I'm not going to get into it right now. But 2013 is a very interesting year. With the exception of the Jewish Home Party, there really are no ultra-Orthodox folks inside the Israeli government for the first time in a decade. Now, the Jewish Home Party is a political party that has links to the Israeli settler movement, so they are strongly nationalistic. And they saw their numbers in the Knesset rise from just 3 during the last legislative session up to today's 12. But what's interesting is that the other parties that are composed of Benjamin Netanyahu's new coalition as of March of 2013 include many progressives and liberals who are really focused upon the what they call social justice. They're focused upon domestic issues. They want to improve the state of Israel internally. And part of it has to do with making peace with these external forces that often wreak havoc in the region. So one party in particular that is part of this new coalition with Benjamin Netanyahu is the Hatnua Party, which is a liberal party dedicated to making peace with the Palestinians. And, the Hatnua Party is very similar to the Labor Party, for those of you who are familiar with those. They have a focus on that social justice, but they have a very unique, strong push for peace, and they are led by a woman by the name of Tzipi Livni. She's now Israel's Minister of Justice under Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, Livni is an interesting character. Like many modern Israelis, she was raised in a strong nationalistic home, but also like many Israelis who are living today in the modern world, Livni seems to desire peace and prosperity against many more decades of struggle, against a sea of enemies. Many Israelis are no doubt realizing that a peace that they control versus a peace that is imposed upon them by some outside external force will likely provide much better terms and conditions. Now, as the leader of the Hatnuah Party, Livni has developed a three-step diplomatic plan for relaunching negotiations with the Palestinians. And this matters because she is appointed by Benjamin Netanyahu to lead negotiations with the Palestinians on these latest talks. So it's important to know what she's thinking. She has a three-step diplomatic plan for relaunching the negotiations. Number one was to secure full coordination with the United States. And Israel wants security promises from the United States similar to the ones that George W. Bush made during his presidency back in 2008 and earlier whenever they were working out the peace negotiations, which stalled in September of 2010. They want to know that the U.S. is going to back up this peace. The second thing is she wants to get the EU support, not their permission, but she wants the EU support because she knows that the EU is historically more hostile than the U.S. towards the nation of Israel. But the backing of the EU is absolutely vital to the sustainability of any peace agreement that's made. So Livni has said that she will also reach out to the Arab League for their support. And that's exactly what it seems to be that we're seeing here. Livni laid all this out, by the way, at the beginning of 2013 whenever she launched the Hatnuah Party. And then months later, she was installed as Netanyahu's Minister of Justice. So it's interesting to see this plan that she had laid out early in the year now coming to fruition. So we can almost use her plan as a blueprint to what's happening right now. The European Commission, by the way, we can see some of the puzzle pieces being moved around, or maybe the chess pieces on the chessboard being moved around. The European Commission is the biggest donor of financial assistance to the Palestinians. Don't know if you know that, but the EU is the biggest donor of financial assistance to the Palestinian Authority. And the Palestinian Authority is very well known in the international community for embezzling money. I mean, Mahmoud Abbas, the guy who runs the Palestinian Authority, the president, this guy has been embroiled in so many embezzling situations, and he's had so many unbelievable claims made about what he's doing that a lot of the international community just doesn't want to give the Palestinians any money because they think it's just going right to his pockets. The EU continues to pump money into the Palestinian area. Now, this week, though, the EU labeled Hezbollah as a terrorist group, the military wing, as a terrorist group. Now, this was a big move because, in essence, this is going to cut off funding for that particular part of Lebanon in particular. And the EU also issued a funding ban on Israeli settlements. So any commerce outfits or anything going on outside of Israel proper, if it's out in these settlements that are disagreed on, then the EU is going to cut off funding and cut off all relations with those particular institutions. And so the EU is really applying some heavy pressure to get this peace accomplished in 2013, 2014. So that's the second step. Get the EU support, and we're already beginning to see that. Also, I should say before we go on to step number 3, getting the EU support was important, and also getting the coordination with the United States was very important. But another very important piece was getting rid of the Muslim Brotherhood's stranglehold on Egypt, who was the number one stumbling block in the way of a peace plan. And so the fact that Egypt has been taken out at this time tells us that more than likely this stuff was staged and it was a coup, and who knows exactly who was behind it. But in essence, it's going to favor the Israeli-Palestinian peace. It's going to favor the West in their efforts to get this done. So more than likely what happened in Egypt came as a result of Western pressure. Now, finally, number 3, Livni says that after we get support from the U.S., after we get support but not permission from the EU, let's hold direct talks with the Palestinians, but no negotiations with Hamas unless they choose to recognize Israel and denounce terror. So paying attention to Zippy Livni, is very important, I believe, for those of you who are watching these Israeli-Palestinian talks. I don't know how far they'll get. I'm not that hopeful that we're going to see much in the way of movement. However, if we do, it will be very interesting to see how Livni's plan is played out in the course of the talks. So we're going to continue monitoring these talks that are coming out of Washington between Israel and the Palestinians, and we'll keep you updated. Stay tuned. We'll keep you updated on the latest.
Innovation changes the game. Product innovation is all about creation and subsequent introduction of a good or service that is either new or improved on a previous good or service. If you're 30 years or older, just think of some of the greatest advancements over the past 30 years. The internet, laptop computers, mobile phones, email, DNA testing, office software, GPS systems, the ATM, on and on. Just like the past 30 years, I'm sure the next 30 years will be as innovative as ever. That is why we created the Contrarian Strategies portfolio to focus on companies that are innovative and have the ability to change the world. Now, these aren't any just run-of-the-mill companies. Instead, they're disruptive technologies and innovations that change the way we live. Many of these companies, the so-called experts said would never pan out. Yet they have emerged from obscure startups to mid-sized game-changing companies. How can you profit from game-changing companies? Companies that are rewriting the rules, refusing to accept the status quo, and focusing on improving the world around us are the game-changing companies I'm referring to. Tesla Motors is changing how we drive cars. The Model S is the world's first premium electronic sedan. Green Mountain Coffee Roasters is changing how we enjoy coffee. K-Cup and View Packs, bag coffee, Keurig coffee makers, and accessories, it is now a major distributor for some of the world's best coffee, tea, and iced K-Cup varieties. Let's not forget about Solar City. Solar City is revolutionizing the delivery of solar energy to homes and businesses across the United States. These are just a few of the innovative game-changing companies I'm talking about. These types of innovative business breakthroughs have the ability to supercharge your portfolio. Are you ready to start an exciting and profitable journey investing in some of the world's most innovative companies? If so, the Contrarian Strategies portfolio may be right for you. As a member of the Contrarian Strategies portfolio, you'll get our list of best buys now, you'll get target buy and sell prices, a monthly newsletter and updates, along with trade alerts whenever we buy or sell a stock in the portfolio, and you'll also receive 24/7 website access. To learn more about the Contrarian Strategies portfolio, go to wallstreetrenegade.com. Again, that's wallstreetrenegade.com to learn more about the Contrarian Strategies portfolio, focusing on some of the world's most innovative companies. Again, that's wallstreetrenegade.com, Contrarian Strategies portfolio.
Hey friends, it's Jerry Robinson here. I am sad to admit that it took the tragic events of September 11th, 2001 to stir me from my slumber. Many of us woke up on that day as our country was ravaged by a vicious act of terror. Since that time, I have been on a mission to wake up Americans around the country to the realities that are facing us, both economically and politically. I have written extensively about the true nature of our monetary system and our fraudulent Federal Reserve. I have spoken across the country and even around the world to audiences of all sorts on the dangers of a coming breakdown of the petrodollar system. And now in 2013, America received yet another massive wake-up call when the world learned that the U.S. was engaged in a vast global snooping operation through its intelligence agencies like the NSA. With this news, FTM Daily has begun to receive a new influx of readers and listeners to our program, and we need your support. We are presenting the truth and standing up and exposing the largest and most powerful organizations in the world, like the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury, the European Central Bank, and the corrupt European Union. How long do you think a broadcast like this can continue in our age of declining freedom of speech? That is why I'm appealing to you, our listening audience, to help us spread this message of financial and personal liberty to as many people as possible. So how can you help? Simply go to ftmdaily.com/email. Go there right now and sign up for our completely free daily briefing email. And when you subscribe, you will receive what I believe to be one of the best email newsletters available on the web. Each day in your inbox, you will get the latest economic and world news that the mainstream media will not touch. And for those of you who are already receiving our daily email newsletter, here's my challenge to you. Forward those emails to at least 10 people this week. Let's not keep this information private. Let's make some noise. Help FTM Daily shine the light on the truth and expose the lies. Go to ftmdaily.com/email right now and sign up for the FTM Daily email news briefing. It's absolutely free. And as always, thank you for your continued support of FTM Daily.
Welcome back to Follow the Money Weekly. And here's Jerry Robinson.
All right, we're in our final segment, friends. We're almost out of time, but I got to squeeze in this petrodollar update that I promised that I was going to get to. It's from the Jerusalem Post. The title of the article, headline, U.S. plans to bring Iran oil exports down to zero. Companies in countries doing business with Iran previously given a pass will be cut off from the U.S. economy. Dateline, Washington. The U.S. House of Representatives will vote next week on legislation aimed at slashing Iran's ability to export any oil. With 360 co-sponsors in the 435-member body, the bill will pass and is expected to be matched in the Senate after Congress's August recess. The article continues. The sanctions bill requests that the U.S. president, under his authority provided by the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, that sounds scary, come up with a strategy within 2 months to cut Iran's remaining export sales of roughly 1 million barrels a day. So Iran is basically selling 1 million barrels of oil a day, much of it to China and Japan and Turkey and South Korea, who continue to import Iranian oil. And the Congress wants to end this. They want Iran not to be able to sell any oil to prop up its economy and thereby create chaos. Very similar to what happened in World War II, when Roosevelt placed very punitive sanctions upon Japan, provoking them in many ways, according to many historians, to launch the Pearl Harbor attack, which was no surprise, according to many historians, although that's how they tried to spin it in the news whenever it came out in the mainstream press. So basically, Congress is going to vote for this sanctions bill, and by August, the Senate is expected to also pass it. This will put pressure on Barack Obama to deal with these companies that are buying Iranian oil. American officials, the story goes on, are confident there is spare capacity in the global market to replace Iran's oil exports. Libya is back to producing oil since its revolution ended in 2011, and they're also doing it, by the way, in U.S. dollars. Libya's leader, Gaddafi, actually tried, believe it or not, to price his oil in a gold-backed dinar. And before you knew it, the guy was living in a rat hole, and they had his head on a silver platter. Now, by the way, they're selling oil in dollars in Libya, and so America is more than happy to let people know that they can buy the excess or the spare capacity from Libya that they would be buying from Iran. With what? What does Iran accept for its oil? Well, it accepts a lot of things, including rubles, gold, yuan. The only thing that it won't accept is a U.S. dollar. The story continues. Previous U.S. efforts cut Iranian oil exports by more than 65%, devastating the economy of the Islamic Republic. Foreign officials and private industry leaders have been briefed on the language of the U.S. bill. So in essence, they're out there letting these countries know that if you don't stop buying oil from Iran with euros, gold, rubles, whatever the case might be, yuan, then we're going to cut you off. China, the article says, stands the most to lose. Iran remains its third largest source of oil after Saudi Arabia and Angola. And the companies that facilitate that trade have major assets in the U.S. PetroChina, China's largest oil producer, is one such company listed on the New York Stock Exchange. These Chinese firms, vocally opposed to extraterritorial sanctions and to taking orders from the United States, have to decide within 14 months whether to have a business relationship with Iran or with the U.S. Now listen to this next sentence. Buried down toward the bottom of this article, it says, the House bill also targets other loopholes in the current sanctions regimen, including, here we go, here it is, foreign exchange reserves that have allowed Iran to deal in euros. These exchanges over the past year have been primarily facilitated by Chinese banks. The bill attempts to strangle the bank's ability to operate with foreign partners of the U.S. All right, so what we have here is proof positive that the United States does not want Iran selling any oil unless it is priced in U.S. dollars. This is the same exact thing that they did to Iraq on September 24th, 2000. Saddam Hussein emerged from a meeting and said he was going to be pricing all of his oil in euros. And in a few years, he was hanging from a noose. Afghanistan and the Taliban tried to stop Unocal from running a pipeline from Turkmenistan down through Afghanistan, Pakistan down to India. They tried to stop it. The next thing you know, we are in Afghanistan after 15 Saudi Arabians out of 19 boarded a plane, hijacked it, and flew it into our buildings. Saudi Arabia attacks us, and we go into Afghanistan. The petrodollar system motivates foreign policy and reminds me of a quote from Thomas Jefferson, and I'm going to leave you with this final word. Thomas Jefferson said this during America's battle with slavery. He said, but as it is, we have the wolf by the ear. When he's talking about the wolf, he's talking about the naked black slave who's in chains. But as it is, we have the wolf by the ear, and we can neither hold him nor safely let him go. Justice is in one scale, and self-preservation in the other. Now, Thomas Jefferson was talking about slavery when he said that. What they had done to the African-American people, to the Africans, brought them over to the United States to prop up rum production, cotton production, and all of this. And they had beat down the black people so much that they realized that they had what Thomas Jefferson said, the wolf by the ear. If they let him go, he's going to devour. But if they hold on to him, it's a moral dilemma. Friends, this is exactly what we've done in the Middle East. We have entangled ourselves in the Middle East for the benefit of the economy. I played the clip for you earlier of the crazy neocon John Bolton, who wants war with the Middle East constantly, and he said flat out, the reason why your kids are dying in the Middle East is because we want better economics. We want cheap gas prices. So we need to lay down some of your kids for that price. It's a sacrifice. Well, I would submit to you that what Thomas Jefferson said about blacks and slavery applies just as well to what the American foreign policy has been towards the Middle East. As it is, we have the wolf by the ear, but we can neither hold him nor safely let him go. Justice is in one scale and self-preservation is in the other. But the question that we need to ask ourselves was, who was the fool who walked up and grabbed a wolf by the ear? That was us. We engaged in the Middle East. We went over there and did what we did. Now extracting ourselves from the Middle East is extremely difficult. Not that it can't be done, but it is going to be extremely difficult. Well, friends, that brings us to the end of our program. Thank you so much for tuning in to this program every single weekend. Share this program with your friends and family. Get this information out. Help us spread this word out across the country through Facebook, through Twitter. Forward the emails that you get from us to friends and family who might be interested in what we're talking about. Help us spread the word. Help us do what we can to wake people up all across this nation. Remember, when you're ready for the truth, just follow the money. Have a safe and prosperous week, and I'll see you right back here next weekend. God bless.
The views and opinions expressed by the guests on Follow the Money Weekly do not necessarily represent the views of FTMDaily.com or Makers Group Financial, LLC. Even though these are proven strategies, Jerry Robinson is not a financial advisor, and his guests are not legal or tax advisors. You should always consult a trained financial advisor and or tax advisor before making any financial decisions. John Burrs is a registered representative of and does offer securities through Sycor Securities Incorporated. Lifetime Decisions Management Incorporated is not a subsidiary of nor controlled by Sycor Securities Incorporated.